Hello everyone, welcome back to the Apex Online Racing Season 15 F1 Championship. Back today for round number 9 at the Italian Grand Prix. And, well, last time out we had quite the race at Spa. The Flying Finn's victory streak of 14 in a row was brought to an end by NLR Evo. And here today at the Monza circuit, he'll be looking to get that winning streak back up and running. Now, NLR Evo finished second to the Flying Finn in Season 14, but it was neither of them that took pole. It was SDL Cal who took pole in a wet session last season, and it was wet once again this season. And it was NLR Evo, in fact, who took pole position a long way ahead of the Flying Finn, who is down in P5, 4/10 of a second behind NLR Evo. Sandwiched in between them were Danny M7 and the two Force Indias of P1R Brown and EVR Reynolds. Some unusual names that we don't usually see at the top of the grid, so they put in some impressive qualifying performances. Rounding out the top 10, CRL Rosberg and TOR Leopard, EVR Morso, Cryo Lockdown and TR Pinecone. Veloce Surprise qualified down in P11. You may know him better as Surprised Me, but he has changed his name after joining the Veloce Esports team. OMG It's Joe down in P12 with Galch, Sam F1 LFC and LGS rounding out the grid. Before we get into today's race though, we are going to take a lap on board with our pole sitter NLR Evo in his Ferrari around this famous Monza circuit. So here we go then, on board with NLR Evo around this famous Autodromo di Monza, on board with the Ferrari driver who is currently sitting in P2 and just behind EVR Reynolds, braking now in to turn 1 and 2, the Variante del Rettifilo, not taking too much curb, and he doesn't want to get onto those big sausage curbs or else that will unsettle the car, so he's nicely out of turn 2 for getting a little bit of wheel spin, even in 4th gear, but now as he goes through the Curva Grande, he's actually nearly 2.5 tenths down on his previous best time before braking underneath the Pirelli board into the Variante del Roja. He takes a lot of curb on entry, and again on exit that curb is nice enough for you to run over. So now into the two Lesmos, and he's made up a lot of time through that second chicane, and nice through the first Lesmo, straightening the car up before going into the second Lesmo. And it's about getting a good exit on here, not too much curb because that will unsettle the car in these bad conditions. And now onto the back straight through the Curva de Seraglio, and now it's all about getting the braking zone right for the Ascari chicane, again underneath the Rolex board this time, not taking too much curb through here, but it's about carrying that momentum through on to the back straight, and he manages to do just that, losing just a little bit of time compared to his previous best, but he is still up by nearly 1/10 and a half before braking at the 100 meter board into the Parabolica, the final turn on this famous circuit, keeping it in 5th gear, again trying not to get too much wheel spin before he gets the power down and towards the line, and that was enough for pole position, making up a lot of time in that final sector. On to the race then, and the rain had not relinquished from qualifying, meaning it was the first wet race of the season. The extreme wet tyres on the cars, and everyone looked as if at the front they got off the line well. NLR Evo holding his lead into turn 1, with the Flying Finn still staying in 5th place after a qualifying session which left him way down the order compared to normal. The rain was falling so heavily at the start of the race that it was difficult to distinguish one driver from another, but TOR Leopard there, you saw going off the track, had had a difficult start to the race and was one of the only drivers to lose positions off the start. He was under pressure into turn 1 at the start of lap 2, showing that it was going to be a big battle throughout the race at the bottom end of the points. OMG It's Joe had already made up 2 positions, and he was about to make that 3 with a lovely lunge down the inside at the Ascari chicane. The Red Bull man really was on a mission to get some points. Surprise's first race under the Veloce name was not going as planned. The Toro Rosso man going wide at turn 1 at the start of lap 3, and that dropped him to the back of the field. There had been a battle between TOR Leopard and EVR Morso since the first lap of the race, but Leopard got back ahead of the McLaren driver and into P7 at the start of lap 4. But come the next chicane, Leopard went wide and fell right to the back of the field, giving Morso P7 back. Leopard may have disappeared, but the battle for P7 had not. This time it was OMG It's Joe going for a move on EVR Morso at the start of lap 5. Morso though managed to hold his ground on the Red Bull man, but this was a battle that would continue later on into the lap. And Joe going down the inside at the second chicane, meaning he was up into P7 and had made up 5 positions so far. On to the battle now for P3, where the Flying Finn had managed to clear both of the Force Indias to get up into that final podium position. The Force India drivers, though, of Reynolds and Brown were fighting between each other, and they had to be careful not to take each other out, because it looked at the moment as if they were going to score some very strong constructors' points. On to the start of lap 9, where Danny M7 and the leader NLR Evo decided it was time to come into the pits, get rid of the full wets and go on to the intermediate tyres as the conditions were just about starting to improve. The Flying Finn and EVR Reynolds followed suit on the next lap, with Reynolds not far behind Finn, meaning he was still in with a shout of that final podium position. The big winner from the round of pit stops was Cryo Lockdown, who has a massive train of cars behind him, but after being in P12 at one point during the start of the race, he was now up into P6. Back up towards the front now, and the Flying Finn was under pressure from the Force India of EVR Reynolds, who was hungry for that final podium place and looked at ease in these wet conditions. It had been a cracking drive up to lap 19 for OMG It's Joe, but he slid through the final corner, making contact with one of the other drivers. And what a bitterly disappointing end to his points charge. He fell all the way down to P12 as a result of that. Joe's teammate Danny M7 had been sitting in P2 for the first 20 laps of the race, but the Flying Finn finally made his way past with just 7 laps to go, and Danny now had to be careful of EVR Reynolds, who was sitting behind him. Reynolds needed no second invitation, and after an impressive lap 20, the Force India driver went for a lunge down into turn 1, but the wet conditions meant that he just couldn't get it slowed down in time. The two would continue to do battle, going side by side on lap 22 through the second chicane, but Danny held firm, holding on to that final podium place. But come lap 27, there was no one touching NLR Evo in this race. What a drive it was from him, taking the fastest lap on the final lap as well. And into the final corner, EVR Reynolds just couldn't close in on Danny M7 in time, meaning the Red Bull driver would take that podium. So NLR Evo finished 8.2 seconds ahead of the Flying Finn, who put in an impressive recovery drive to take 18 points in P2, ahead of Danny M7, a very impressive third place, just 0.3 of a second ahead of EVR Reynolds, who was followed home by his teammate P1R Brown in P5. Cryo Lockdown held on to that 6th position despite incurring a 3-second penalty, with EVR Morso in P7 ahead of CRL Rosberg, and TR Pinecone and Veloce Surprise rounded out the top 10. Only 13 drivers made it to the checkered flag, with Galch, Joe and Sam making up the final 3 positions. OMG It's Joe very unlucky not to score points this afternoon, with TOR Leopard and LGS not making it to the end. On to the drivers' standings now, where the top 6 remain unchanged, but NLR Evo slashes the gap to 65 points behind the Flying Finn, who looks ominous for another title in AOR. Veloce Surprise and CRL Rosberg in 3rd and 4th ahead of TRL Martin and Veloce Limitless. EVR Reynolds moves up a position into 7th ahead of TOR Leopard, with Danny M7 and EVR Morso rounding out the top 10. Mercedes, of course, still on top in the constructors' standings ahead of Ferrari and Toro Rosso, but it was an impressive afternoon for Force India, who took home 22 points to move ahead of both McLaren and Williams in the standings. Red Bull there sit in 7th, but have closed the gap to the top 6, with Sauber, Haas and Renault the bottom 3. So that caps off an eventful Italian Grand Prix, where NLR Evo took his 2nd victory of the season. Join me next time for the Singapore Grand Prix, where we'll find out whether that championship battle will reignite. But until next time, guys, do take care. Bye-bye.